Hello and welcome to this episode of the Digital Disruption Podcast with Pete Gatenby and myself, Chris Williams. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about people on the journey of transformation and change, which this industry sector is most definitely in the throes of. At the heart of it lies people. Technology is often front and centre by virtue of the fact we're going through technological advancements, but it's actually the people that drive things forward. So in today's episode, we're going to cover that topic and share with you some tips, tricks and strategies that can help you accelerate your transformation. Hello there, mate. How are we doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. It's been a busy few weeks, but good.
It's definitely been a busy couple of weeks. I guess before we get into the main topic, just highlights of those. We've got this last week has been the biannual RTGS updates, which is interesting because, of course, that affects the impacts the property industry. We've got BSAs on the horizon, which I know we're attending, part with client and part as ourselves, and then we've got immersion tours.
Immersion tours, yep.
Tell me a little bit about that one, because that's not something we've spoken about recently.
No, absolutely. Look, this is, I guess, one of our more niche sub-products that sits within the strategic consulting arm of what we do, where we take a small group at typically a strategic level away from their typical environment and show them something new, whether it's another industry, whether it's another part of the world, take them there and show them what's going on there and then bring the lessons back with a full application roadmap that goes around it. So we're planning quite an exciting one actually for later in the summer. So
this is all about basically immersifying executive teams into specific environments where they can learn a lot.
That's exactly
and then kind of apply that into their own businesses.
Yeah, exactly. And you, Bank of England, I hear it's been very exciting.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting update the other day. Obviously, some of that stuff we can't go into in too much detail just at the moment till it's sort of formally released. But look, I think we know that the RTGS platform upgrades are relevant to this industry sector. Obviously, that impacts the payment element of it. There's going to be certain things that are coming on stream with that. It was an interesting update, and be good to share some of that in the coming weeks ahead and how that's going to impact the industry. But yeah, certainly been a busy couple of weeks, as you know, working heavily on that. I'm heavily involved in things at that sort of settlement and lodgement area, but also actually looking at it further upstream as well, and how we kind of bring that digital end-to-end process together to deliver a true end-to-end experience. But moving forward into today's topic, we're going to be talking about people. As I said in the intro, we've been in and around, people who lie at the heart of it is basically what I said in the introduction. But you and I, as well as our colleagues, have been in and around digital transformation across industry sectors, but specifically in financial services for over a decade now.
Yep.
Certainly spent much longer than that inside of technology companies. And the one thing that always stands out is that tech is the enabler. That's a phrase we've used on this podcast many a time before, but at the heart of it is people. And from this episode, we wanted to try to get across to the audience really the tips, tricks, strategies, the important parts of how you take people sort of on that transformation journey.
Yep.
Taking people on a journey of transformation, specifically at an organizational level. It's really important to deliver that sort of context, that sort of blend of vision, engagement, and sort of practicalities of what's got to happen. So let's start digging into that. From your experience, what are the key things that you'd want to share in that from a people standpoint when going on that journey?
Well, first and foremost, I always say this, and you've sat in plenty of meetings where I've spouted this line, but people is possibly the most complex part. Technology, everyone thinks that's the complex part because of all the new emerging tech and the complex integrations and everything else. And actually, technology is probably one of the easiest parts, because if you tell the right people to do the right thing, they will build you the right thing. But if you don't have the right people, it doesn't matter what you tell them, they will not necessarily be able to do the right thing. So when it comes to that kind of trifecta of transformation, you got the people, you got the process, and you got the technology. Technology and process are relatively well trodden and relatively easy to define. People,
every organisation is different. It is the key thing. I think the first starting point for any sort of executive team is to establish a very clear vision.
Yep.
And I think sometimes visions, and I've seen sort of, the vision statements on walls and things like that, but it needs to be unequivocally clear. And back in the day, we used to call it a tweet.
Yep.
Tweets have got a lot longer now. But it used to be, look, you need to be able to kind of tweet that vision and just make it very unequivocally clear. And I think that's the starting point. Establish a clear vision that really clearly articulates what the transformation is for and the benefits of it. And I think that's ultimately step number one.
Yep.
Where are we going? Why are we going there? And what is it that we ultimately need to do? That's kind of the very clear, boom, this is it.
Yeah, you're 100% correct on that one. And there's a few little tools that I've been engaged in a couple of programs recently where this has become abundantly clear. And the fact that even the people in the product teams are not quite able to articulate what it is that's being built. And if the people in the team can't articulate what's being built, how can the people in the rest of the organisation understand what's being built? How can the customers understand what it is that's being delivered? And so having that kind of single vision is vitally important. And one of the tools that we've been using a lot recently is it's an Amazon framework where you use a PR or like press release and then add the FAQs to it, PR FAQ. And the idea is that if you start to think of a product press release, you write that product press release, but you also compile the frequently asked questions that journalists may ask when as part of the a press release. Then it allows you to think about technology implementation, a product build, whatever it might be, in a round way, and actually it helps everyone in the team to begin to consider it from that lens. And it's actually something that I've seen to be hugely powerful, and really focus everyone's minds. That's kind of just one tool that I've kind of seen recently working really, really well.
Is that really about trying to explain a real simple model that you, especially in bigger businesses, if we break this down, you've got quite large, so if we look at, say, the banks and big financial institutions, they're usually large. There's usually more than sort of 150, 250 people in those sorts of businesses. It's thousands in the bigger guys. Then you've got sort of mid-sized organisations. Then you've got small businesses. For the big guys, they've got to communicate a lot. They've got to communicate information to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Is what we're saying here. Look, this is a great method to be able to kind of do that at a level, but then get that out into the organisation. And it's those FAQ bits that are like everybody just kind of gets on stream with that and they get it.
I have seen it used in that way as part of almost your comms strategy. But actually the way it's been used recently, and this is quite a complex program of work that I'm involved in, is it's about getting the narrative out from the product team aligned. Because the problem is that because there's so many different strands of work within the program itself, no one in that team is telling the same story. And so when someone comes to the team and says, "So what is it you guys are doing?" they get a different answer every time. And so bringing everyone onto the same page from a delivery team standpoint is kind of really important. But of course, it can be used in the way you're describing as well, which is, I guess, why it's quite a popular tool in kind of that transformation and people side of things.
Brilliant. Moving into some of the other steps, an area where a lot of organisations have struggled, and this actually still exists. It's not as prominent as it used to be sort of 5-6 years ago, but it's actually ways of working. And I think specifically in this industry, the UK sort of home buying sector, where you've got a different groups of people within the ecosystem, ways of working is something actually that's really important. And because people are at the heart of that, how should organisations be addressing that change and kind of looking at going from current state of how they currently operate and work at the moment to what it is that they perhaps need to be, which is more agile, more lean, and more sort of responsive to change. And just before we sort of dig into that and answer it, a sort of sub-question to that would be, what are the kind of types of working practices that they potentially should be implementing?
Yeah, so the only way we can really have a meaningful discussion about this, I think, is if we take a use case. no particular reason I'm picking this, but take the implementation of a new core banking system, right? It's huge. Now, on the face of it, it's like ripping out the engine of a car and dropping in a new engine in really simplistic technology terms. Now then, what sits around that is actually quite complicated, because in implementing a new core banking system, you're touching every single process within a lending institution. And so, take a building society, if they're dropping in a new core banking system, every single way of working for each of those teams, whether it's support, level 1 support, level 2, level 3, whatever it might be, all the way through to your product teams, and how they're now having to work and start to run some of the integrations with some of their, could even be the MarTech tools that they've got. Everything starts to change, and so the ways of working that sit around that become quite important quite quick. Now, in terms of how do we start to address that, well, look, this is kind of practical application now of actually as part of that transformation. One of the core things that needs to sit alongside that is that strategic operating model that sits in each of the strands of work that touch whatever the piece of technology is that's being dropped in. Now, core banking system is big, and so the operational work to facilitate the people to continue to be able to do those jobs becomes quite big as well, because it's a complex tapestry, right? There's so many integrated processes. Now, some of the most successful transformations that I've seen and been a part of have been the ones that have really gone back to basics when it comes to this. And what I mean by that is they go back to the core of what is the job to be done by a certain group of people, certain departments, certain teams, whatever it might be. Begin to go through the age-old things we talk about value stream mapping, saying what needs to happen in the as-is. Begin to map the to-be, but strip things out, because actually what it often offers quite a nice, refreshing change of pace to, because there's a new technology, there's new ways of doing things are now being facilitated, but also it allows them to strip out some of perhaps the more admin-heavy tasks, because they can now be overtaken by technology, or actually it was just a legacy part of the process that's no longer needed for some regulatory requirement that was 10 years old and outdated and is no longer needed to be done. I've seen that happen more than once on quite a large scale.
Yeah.
And so it presents a huge opportunity. The worst transformations I've seen, and I want to argue perhaps not as instrumentally a part of as the good ones, just to save face a little bit. But the worst ones I've seen have been the ones that have not necessarily looked at it holistically.
Yeah.
And so what they've done is they've dropped a new piece of technology in, but they aren't able to realise the benefits. The people are still struggling with the legacy processes and the legacy ways of working, and actually all the benefits that they were perhaps sold by the salesperson of the enterprise piece of technology that's being dropped in, as we've all been there and seen that, aren't ever able to be realised.
Well, isn't this interesting? Because what we're describing here is, and it's a phrase I've used a lot with teams before, is there's a major difference between transformation and change. Change is building a better version of the past. Transformation is reimagining what we've got today, and doing something different for similar outcomes, sometimes different outcomes. And when you talk about that in the context of, how organisations sometimes approach transformation, and I want to kind of bring this right down into the UK sort of home buying market now, because we're in this second phase of transformation. When organisations approach this, they can obviously take this technology first approach. And I think this is a kind of real sort of red flag for people.
Yep.
Though if you're seeing a technology first approach, stop. You need to take a people first approach. Now, I want to just clear that up. Be technology first businesses. Every company today is a technology company, irrelevant of what you do. You're a law firm, you're a tech company that provides legal services. If you're a bank or a lender, you are a technology company that provides financial services. Whatever, you are a tech company. Take a technology first approach. Be a technology first company rather. But in terms of the context of transformation, if you're transforming your organisation, you have to take a people-centric approach and understand that high-performing teams in the modern world today don't look like they did in the 20th century with all this kind of nuts hierarchy and everything else. There's certain levels of it, but this is fundamentally how you start to enable people to really drive transformation. Change is a part of it, but I think that's really, there's red flags there, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll remembering in times gone by, I do believe it's less so now, because I do believe that people, organisations, beginning to understand or hopefully more understand the power of transformational management and that sits around it. But I've been through so many procurement processes when big programs of technology work getting signed off, where either the finance boards, the procurement teams, or even the IT teams are stripping out that people side of programs because they've got budgets, right? They want to get as much done within their budget as possible, understandably so. It's less so now. I want to argue it is less so now, but we've been there where we've seen that stripped out of the program of work, and then everyone looks at the implementation at the end and says, "Why is no one using the new technology that we've dropped in?"
Yeah,
and
because it's not been joined up.
It's not being joined up to the process.
Let's turn now to actually the people that kind of drive through the transformation. In summary, what we're saying is you've got to start with that kind of vision. What is it that you're wanting to achieve, and why you're going to do it, why you're doing it. So establishing that clear vision, the operating models that sit around of that, the ways of working, you've got to kind of get all of that stuff understood. And again, how you go from current state to future state, you've got to kind of develop that map, which is going to require people.
Yep.
Starting off on this, what I'd like to put out there is get help, because what you have today isn't going to take you into tomorrow. It'll certainly be a major part of it, but there will be gaps. Unquestionably, there's going to be gaps. I've never been inside an organisation that's genuinely going through a level of transformation, continues to do so, and they're not having to bring in SMEs, certain levels of expertise, training into their incumbent teams to cross-pollinate knowledge. Knowledge transfer is key, but I've never seen it done where that's not happened. And I think that's a big first message. You've got to get the right people around you and have them in from the start and going through it. So even at that executive layer, you've got to get we talked about the immersion tours. The immersion tours help at the executive layer. They start to see the gap analysis. Then the next phase beneath that then is to start to look at that pathway. Don't just allow consultants to draw the pathway. You've got to actually have your teams, your senior teams involved in architecting that pathway from current state to future state. There's some really big ones for me, because I've seen it where, we've been in organisations, certainly I've been in an organisation, I remember it, it was pre-COVID, whereby the transformation had started. It hadn't been going particularly well. It wasn't where it needed to be. I was crafted in to go and look at how do we kind of accelerate this, and sticking out like a sore thumb was the fact that there was an incumbent third-party organisation that had effectively drew the path, and it was sort of like, well, this isn't congruent with the people that are inside of this business, and all they're doing is body shopping a chunk of other people, because it's you've got to be part of this transition, and we've got to put you into a state of readiness and then go on the journey. And then, this is about you guys driving it forward with the help and support of an external party as and when required. And I think that's such a big thing that happens. And obviously they're in larger organisations, but this is the same for smaller businesses too. There's lots of, boutique and independent consultants that can go and sort of help these sorts of organisations. But they're the sort of big ones for me is to ensure you've got the right help and training to get the people, the current people and the right new people coming in on that journey.
Yeah.
What else is there on there? Building high-performing teams, things like that. There's frameworks, there's models. What are the key things that you'd be putting out there?
Alignment towards a common goal and buy-in from the team is obviously hugely important. Thinking back to the famous book, Will It Make the Boat Go Faster, a little bit now, but that's a hugely important one. And if you've not read that book or looked at the work those guys are doing, in fact, we've sat in many a room with those guys, actually, interestingly enough. That's another story for another time. But alignment and beginning to focus everyone's minds on making the small tweaks and everything that needs to be done to move things forward quicker towards that common goal is hugely important. I think the second one is people in the right position. And one of the things that you just said as a flip side of a coin, which is obviously getting people in, getting the external support. On the flip side, there's also occasionally times where people need to be not removed, but repositioned into the place where they can add the most value. And we've all been part of those conversations where it's become abundantly clear that actually the person doing a particular job that was previously a linchpin is no longer that like kind of linchpin part of the team, and actually their skills are needed elsewhere and they need to be repositioned. It's a sensitive conversation, of course it is. And look, within technology, we're seeing it a lot at the moment because obviously you've got the onset of artificial intelligence. Everyone's worried about what that means for people's jobs and that side of things. It's not, I don't think it's a scary thing. I think it's quite an exciting thing because people get new opportunities to do new things, but they have to be along for the journey and part of and bought in. So those two points go hand in hand. Alignment towards the common goal or whatever it is we're trying to achieve, and then positioning people in the right place to take advantage of their skill set is kind of two ones that always stand out in the front of my mind.
And if we break it down even further, organisations are essentially a group of different departments.
Yeah.
What you have to do is remove the silos from those departments if you're going to create high-performing teams that are delivering on transformation. To achieve that objective, to get to that goal, you've got to make them cross-functional.
Yeah.
What we mean by cross-functional is, you have a multi-skilled, multidisciplinary team working on something. So if you're building a product and you've got technology being brought in, you don't just have the techies in there. You have people from other parts of the business. I think that's really important for organisations to kind of get into. I think that's quite, I wouldn't say it's ubiquitous, but I think it's very prominent now in most organisations. But
And it's even more prominent in the home buying space because
I think it is at a vendor and possibly lender level and so, but I'm not, in some areas, I mean, I think certainly perhaps maybe in the law firm community, they probably won't be familiar per se with agile ways of working, I wouldn't have thought. I mean, certainly the ones I've come across are not. It depends on the size of them, if they've got technology teams, but if you're a mid-tier firm, I'm not convinced they are necessarily fully au fait with kind of agile ways of working and lean principles. And I think that flow, especially when you think about their process and their process maps, it's very waterfall in how things are done.
Yeah.
If you think about it, it's quite a way of, it's an adjustment. I mean, that's, that was a whole topic on its own, really. It'd be interesting perhaps to talk to some firms about that. Maybe we could get some on. If you're one listening, get in touch. We'd love to have you on and talk about this, because we don't do that much directly inside them. But I do think there's, in certain pockets of this industry, that is kind of, everybody gets it. But I can't imagine there's small to medium-sized firms, law firms this is, that have actually been through agile ways of working and understand, the difference between a Scrum board and a Kanban board. And this isn't about trying to teach them tech, but it is about teaching, it is about sharing some knowledge that would actually potentially help them accelerate adoption of certain things.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think there are learnings from the technology world that are being applied in the real world. I mean, if we go outside of our industry now, we go to manufacturing, you start to look at Tesla, right? They've applied that kind of principle to their production lines. Every Tesla that comes off is better than the Tesla before. They make those incremental improvements. They use the agile principles as part of the engineering and manufacturing process. Interestingly enough, they actually put it all the way through to their marketing as well. And so everything's connected up. But it's fascinating stuff. But when we start to apply that to take the world of the legal space, what efficiency can be made as part of the conveyancing process if a similar principle was taken?
And that's partly my point. I've not witnessed that. That's not to say it's not happening, but I certainly haven't witnessed it. And that comes back to me again to the sort of high performing team piece. Yeah. History is a great place to look for what's going to come next. And let me explain that, because what I mean is when you look back, you can see how things transform, how things change.
Success leaves clues.
It certainly does. It's a favourite one of mine, as you know. And if you look at history, we all know that industries have a shelf life. There's the bell curve. It exists there for a reason, and slowly it'll things will change. And what happens is these industries get disrupted. Now, this is happening much more quicker now, and this is an industry sector that's is having a level of disruption within it. It's not had massive disruption, but I think more and more is going to come. And I think it's important that people recognise that. I think, well, do we want to be a spectator in this, or are we actually going to play a part of it? And I think to play a part of it, you've got to understand those agile ways of working, and having high-performing teams around you that can operate in that way is going to be the difference between you being a spectator and not.
And even how you form those teams and how you position those teams. Now, the larger organisations, I'm seeing this with the larger tech teams now, are beginning to adopt almost that Spotify model of tribes and guilds. And actually what it allows them to do is, and just super quickly for anyone who might be listening and that might be completely alien to, because I mentioned it in a product team the other day and everyone looked at me and I had to explain it. But the idea is that you've got teams of people or squads of people who are in development teams, and you will have a product owner, a product manager, perhaps an engineering manager, perhaps a designer, perhaps a couple of developers, and they are in a squad. But going across, you've got the guilds and tribes, and it's all aligned in like a.
It's a matrix.
Yeah, it's a matrix. I was moving my mic up and down. I thought people aren't going to be able to listen to me. But it's basically a matrix. And so what it allows, I call them centre of excellences, or centre of practice, or groups of practice. There's a whole load of names for them. And what it allows is that people who are in similar working functions to meet and share ways of doing things and best practices that they're learning. Well, could be on a completely different track of work, but they're learning better ways of doing things. And then what you get is almost a cross matrix of people who are responsible for certain elements. So it could be regulatory. Typically, you'd have a person from regulatory in that kind of group.
Governance, things
and compliance and governance. But actually, you can have representatives from across the matrix, across the different squads, and across different disciplines as well, whose responsibility is to then take the learnings and take the decisions back to their group across the matrix, so across to their peers who are in the same practice areas as them, but also into their working squads. So I don't know if there's a new regulation about how quickly a ping has to be done to recognise some funds are being moved somewhere, I don't know. Then they would bring that back into their working squad who might be working on that particular piece of functionality. But actually you start to apply that to the way groups of people are working as a whole in the home buying market, actually becomes quite powerful, because it allows, and what Spotify proved was that you could have a highly efficient product team all working on individual areas that came together towards a single product vision that could deliver on it quickly at scale, and also could scale up and down depending upon what the business requirements were at the time, because they had the framework ready to go.
Look, I mean, I've seen it used a number of times, and obviously it's quite a famous model now in sort of other areas. But I think this also points to the fact that if we've talked about collaboration before. I think the industry as a whole talks a lot about collaboration. We usually sit on the kind of sidelines observing that, sort of almost semi-frustrated, saying, well, talking is cheap, collaborating is actually getting together and doing something. That model actually can demonstrate how you could do that cross-industry, across the ecosystem. You can do this inside your organisation, what we're talking about, but you can actually do it as a group. So if we saw this in telecommunications when the convergence of telecoms and the internet came together, sort of early 2000s, we saw that convergence arrive, ultimately powered by cloud computing. There's a link here, don't worry. And what we saw is that the collaboration between internet service providers, telecommunications companies, in order for small to medium size, what were telco businesses that traditionally were providing telephone landlines into businesses, mobile telecommunications, minutes, all that kind of stuff, they now needed to get into broadband, internet services, IP, and all that kind of good stuff that we now all do today. In order for the smaller guys to be able to compete with the bigger guys, they had to create conglomerates. They had to almost come together. They were independent businesses, but they created models where they brought together buying power. Now that can happen in this industry sector, not necessarily to buy, because you're not buying something and resell. There's not a reseller model in this industry. But what there is most definitely are groups of people who are all trying to achieve the same thing. There's enough business out there for everybody to have a go at. But if they came together, utilising and leveraging those ways of working, that model, understanding that people are a major part of transformation, and then understanding what tech to produce and use, they could probably get to where it is they want to get to a hell of a lot quicker.
Absolutely, because it creates industry efficiency.
Yeah.
And everyone benefits, especially the end customer and the customer experience at the end of it.
Yeah. So as we start to draw to a close of this then, I'm mindful to want to give people some real sort of key tips, tricks. I think we've gone through some great stuff today where there's definitely lots of substance in there. But at a high level, just to kind of play some of these back, at the top end, we're saying people are a key part of what it is that you do.
Yep.
You've got technology, process, and people. They're the kind of three pillars that you might want to look at a high level. Technology, process, people, number one. Number two, when you're going on that transformation journey and you've understood that people are a part of it, tech's a part of it, processes are part of it, to get the people to come with you on that journey, you've got to establish a clear vision from the outset. Let them know where it is that you're going, why you're going there. Communicate that openly and frequently. Beyond there, get some help. Start to understand the current state. Where are we today? What does our current technology estate look like? What does our current processes look like? What do our current people look like? Then look at what the future state needs to be. Again, same exercise, but what's the future state? And then it's about building a roadmap. How do we go from where we are now to where it is that we want to be? We moved on from there, and you talked about those really, I guess, the stepping stones of what that needs to be, and the frameworks that you can use to help get you there. That is target operating model. How do we need to operate? This is around the process piece, but the people are a part of it. But you've got that building of that roadmap. Get some help.
Yeah.
But make sure you're a part of figuring out and crafting and architecting what that roadmap is the second step of the road mapping phase. So the first step was the people involved, get some help and get the right people involved. The second step is to architect it out with the right your people as well as some help. The third thing really in that journey, in this particular step, is to ensure that when you know what the future state is and you've worked out the roadmap, that isn't a big bang release. It's an incremental process where you go in step by step by step and try to break that down into small chunks. We've also talked about the importance of those high-performing teams. How do you create those high-performing teams? Which is the bit that we just kind of concluded on there. There are a couple of additional things, though, that I guess for me are actually sort of really important. And that is consistency of training is one of them, to ensure that you've got your people are consistently on that journey. And the second one is a phrase that you use in our business quite a lot when we're doing our retrospectives and monthly and quarterly reviews, which is don't be afraid to course correct.
Yeah, I agree 100%. There's one other that I would add to that too, to make it a trio. Communication plans, internal communications.
Yeah. Can we just delve into the course corrects a little bit? Because the way that you do that in our business has always been very much focused on, we know what the outcomes are. We follow an OKR, objectives, key results model.
Yep.
But the course correction actually can only work if you're following an incremental path.
Absolutely. So the principle behind the course correct is that you are measuring at micro increments. You're micro measuring
Now this isn't micromanaging.
Very clear. Although it is weirdly a version of micromanaging, but on your, I guess, in your actions as an organisation rather than on people. But we micro measure our steps that we take to ensure that we're making progress in the right direction. Because sometimes, as in any organisations, we're running tests on something that might work, or we've keeping close eye on a particular client and how something's progressing, because a piece of advice or a piece of new technology, we're often at the fore and kind of breaking new ground. And so we're keeping super close eye on things. And then we also have the micro indicators of either A, things are going great, brilliant, carry on, but sometimes things are going wrong. Now that's not devastating. It's an indication that you need to either tweak or change what you're doing, and sort of being confident and taking that action is vitally important in the long-term success. Because if we look back on mistakes that are often made, and we're talking grandiose now, and people do the retrospectives, we often see that people highlight, actually, we thought things might be going wrong, perhaps 3 or 4 months before actually it came to a head. So these are being recognised. The reason we course correct is because we recognise those micro indicators and take action based on it. Sometimes the action is give it a little bit more time and let's see what happens in the next couple of weeks. Other times it's right, let's do something else. We need to change that and move it in a different direction. So that's it in a nutshell.
Brilliant. And then your final one there was obviously communication.
Yeah, communication. Look, this is a tradition, and training and communication go hand in hand in any change management 101 book. But bringing stakeholders on the journey of transformation is hugely important. You do that in 2 ways. Train the ones who are close to it and going to be on the new piece of technology, the new system that's being dropped in, or the new whatever it might be. And the communication is communicating to the broader stakeholders, whether they're customers, whether they're internal stakeholders, but who are not necessarily going to be using the system or the product directly, but that they know that this change is here, and therefore it serves 2 purposes. 1, to inform. 2, to prepare them for what might be teething problems, shall we say. But second of all, to help them accept and support it, because that's the biggest thing, right? When they start to support and you become advocates for a transformational program, then you know you've been successful.
So that concludes today's episode of the Digital Disruption podcast. If there are any questions that you have, as always, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us via the usual channels. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast. For now, thanks ever so much for tuning in, and we will see you again in a couple of weeks' time.
Cheers, guys.